Grow, Sell, and Retire is the podcast for the lazy overachiever. B.D. Dalton, author of The Assisted Purchase, True Gravity, and Grow, Sell, and Retire, is here to give his 25 years of secrets, tips, and assistance to take your business to the next level. This podcast is for anyone who wants to sell more, work less, and make better business. Now, here's your host, BD, with today's GSR podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast. Really excited about today's episode. I'm going to talk to Robert Siegel. And I was saying, Robert, how do I introduce you? And actually, he said something so much better than I could say. You know, we're friends digitally, but I don't know if I could say, I'm sure once we shake hands that I'll say this about you in the future. But tell us.
Dude, you can say it whenever you want. Like, there's no problem at all. You can say whatever you want about me.
No, I think your description is much better. So we're going to talk a lot today about digital. We're going to talk about companies. We're going to talk about small companies going big companies going backwards. But let's talk. Tell us why we're talking to you today. What's your background? And you've written a book and are in the process of writing another book. But let's talk about where we got to today to have us interacting.
All right. Well, BD, it's great to be here. Always good to see you and talk with you. So I am a lecturer in management at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where I've taught 9 different courses over the last couple of decades. My career, however, was on the operating side, worked in large companies like GE and Intel, was a several-time entrepreneur, a couple of companies that got acquired, was a middle manager in a company that went public, a software company. I was a slimy, scum-sucking VC for 15 years, and I've kind of been lucky enough in my life to have a foot in academia, a foot in operating, and a foot in investing. And that's kind of shaped a lot of what we're going to talk about today.
And amongst all of that, you kind of encapsulated that, and a couple of years ago, popped out a book. So,
right. My first book was The Brains and Brawn Company, How Leading Organizations Blend the Best of Digital and Physical. We looked at both incumbents and disruptors, and we'll talk more about that today. Also, in the process of writing my second book, I vowed I would never write another book. Of course, now I'm writing another book, which is about systems leadership. Of course, I teach with my old boss, Jeff Immelt, the former CEO of GE.
It's good company to be writing with. Very good company to be writing with.
He's I've been able to know Jeff for a long time and see the high highs and the low lows, and he's taught me a lot in my career.
That's amazing. So describe this when you talk about in the book, you talk about physical and digital. People can kind of imagine that, but talk about that from a business point of view. What are you talking about when you talk where you brought it together in the book?
You know, when we started a course in about 2016 at Stanford, it was called The Industrialist Dilemma. And the thesis originally was that digital companies, signified by Silicon Valley, were moving into a wide variety of traditional industries, whether it was mobility or healthcare or fintech. And what we found as we were meeting with CEOs from companies all over the world was that the best companies were not just these, digital disruptors who were coming in. But we found that really to be successful in a world where every product and service is connected, the best organizations were blending the best of digital and physical. And so we kind of took it away, this notion of brains and brawn. The greatest companies had the digital side, which is the brain side, the brawn side, the physical side, logistics, manufacturing, et cetera. And we also found that incumbents were not doomed and disruptors were not ordained. And so the idea behind the book was to look at the best practices of what we saw in companies, again, all over the world that really kind of embodied these best 5 digital and 5 physical attributes. And then we also kind of introduced the notion of systems leadership, which Jeff and I were just starting at the time, and now is going to be the subject of the second book.
That is really cool. So when you start going down that path, if you're looking at it's starting a business or moving it forward, or not starting a business, but let's say that you've already got the foundations, you're moving it forward. How do you view this? So when you're approaching it from here's my software and I'm Uber, but then do I own taxis? Am I I'm Apple, but then do I own so I own iTunes, but do I own the phone? So when you start to integrate those things, but from somebody that's at $1 million, 5 million, 10 million pound turnover, that's making mops. I don't know. It's not, I'm not trying to be so silly.
No, it's actually not that silly. It's a great example because there's really not any product or service that's not connected. Look at our televisions now and how those changed. And so, the lowly telephone is now a mini computer that we carry in our pockets. And so we see so many things that we have that are connected, our music that we listen to, how we get our healthcare. And so what we found was that the incumbent organizations knew they had to develop digital competencies. And the ones that did it well were the ones that internalized it and said, we need to make this a core competency inside of what we have on ourselves. It's got to be about, how do we use digitization and how do we use data and data science with what we have and make sure that we don't just outsource those competencies to other people? How do we think about things about how we go towards risk and how we think about artificial intelligence? How do we think about things about how we balance ownership and partnership? And so what we found was the best incumbents really were learning from their digital partners and the digital upstarts coming into their space, embracing it, but not letting go of that which made them great. And so you started to see that duality that came into companies. And so you couldn't just kind of like, hi, now we're going to switch to an open office plan and we're going to hire a chef and start wearing blue jeans. Like that wasn't enough because those were superficial changes. Really, how did you kind of think about not only hiring in new skills, but requiring your team to reinvent itself in a world where technological change was coming at an increasing rate and speed?
So speaking of speed and technology, you wrote this in 2021, 22, brought it out 2021. Things have moved on so much faster digitally in the last 6 months, 7 months. So if you were going back, and I know it's only been 2 years, but you were going back and you were writing the next chapter on AI and integration and the brain and brawn and stuff like that, how deep did you go into it? And did you think that you were right when you wrote it in the book previously?
Well, of course, when I wrote it, I thought I was right. The hard part about a book like this is, how's it going to age? And some of the examples of the companies we used have done really well and have continued to thrive. Yeah. Some of them have struggled. Even if you go back to books like Good to Great, or you go
I was going to say Jim Collins didn't had to write Too Great to Fail, and
or all of those things that we kind of go back to. The world is constantly changing, and that's actually one of the consistent themes. So I think what we saw right after the book came out was that the incumbents had some unfair advantage because a lot of these industries were slower to move. They don't change overnight because they're at such huge scale. Energy transition, et cetera, et cetera. However, look at what happened with AI in the last, basically 15 months since the launch of ChatGPT and all of that activity. And one of the themes that I'm writing about now is we live in a world of constant change, and we live in a world that's a constant crisis. And if we go back to the last couple of decades, it kind of was crazy. We had the internet bubble, then everything crashed, then we had 9/11, then we had the global financial crisis, right? Then we have, contagion throughout Asia and other parts of financial crises there. We have wars that happen. We had COVID. And I think really this is kind of the new normal. And so I think what I'm starting to write about now and talking to leaders about is, how do leaders lead in this world of constant change? Because, it's never like we never get to that point where we get to put the oars in the boat and the current just gently takes us down the stream and everything's okay. And so really, how are leaders in a world where they're having to deal with this constant change? How do they change their own skill sets, their own competencies, their own mindset? But how do they kind of project a bit of calm and gravitas and stand tall in these times, which, it's interesting. Alvin Toffler wrote this book, Future Shock, in 1970.
I've got it upstairs on my bookshelf. Right. It's a beautiful
It's amazing. It's like reading Nostradamus, right? He predicted, the move to cities. He predicted fast fashion. He predicted influencers, all of this stuff. And the thesis of the book, where he coined the phrase information overload, is that technology is changing so quickly. We as humans, we can't handle it. And that was 54 years ago. And so now here we're at a time where it's kind of growing at an increasing pace, and leaders, no matter what they do, are feeling like no matter what they do, they're getting it wrong, right? Are they supposed to lead with IQ or EQ? Do you bring people in to, they have to be in the work all the time, or is everyone going to be remote? Do I speak up on social issues? Do I not speak up on social issues? What do I have to know about digital and physical? And so much of it feels overwhelming. So I think a lot of the trends that we identified in Brains and Brawn are still true. I think what's really, I'm learning that setting people apart is about how leaders, how they approach it, how they put systems in place in their organizations, and how even they themselves adapt on an increasingly frequent basis to learn new skills and new competencies.
So when you and Jeff have people in and they're sitting through the MBAs or the higher levels, and they're looking back at their business, because most of the people that go through an MBA are either coming out of some sort of workplace or working for somebody while they're going through it. What are some of the things that you're really seeing repetitively coming through that are systems driven, that you just say, if you just did had a hiring policy or, something silly, but what's something that you're seeing repetitively coming through that people are able to put in place?
It's a good question. And I think that there isn't an answer with a capital A. And that's actually, I think, the thing that's more important right now. And if we think about it like a series of waves that are coming in on the shore, the waves are going to continue to come. And the question is, how do you ride those waves? And so I've seen the great leaders are doing certain things. They are good at both execution and innovation. One of my colleagues at Stanford, Charles O'Reilly, along with Michael Tushman at Harvard, wrote about the ambidextrous organization, which is what they called exploit and explore. You get your core business and you keep it functioning well and making money, and then you've got to have kind of the new innovation stuff that happens. And so the ambidextrous organization can do both. But historically, we kept those things separate inside of companies. Yeah. Like you had the people who were really good at operations, and then the crazy long hairs who came up with crazy ideas. And actually what we're finding now is the great leaders know how to do both. They know how to hit their numbers, and they know how to manage small teams. They also, on the people side, have figured out how to provide both strength and empathy at the same time. They're not going to be a hamster who's always going to be talking about their feelings, but at the same token, they're not going to be kind of the kind of jerk who constantly drove people hard. And we're seeing the leaders that are really kind of getting the followers are the ones that have the ability to show a strong leader when they walk into a room, but also to show their humanity and see the humanity of the people with whom they're speaking. These are people who understand both internal and external at the same time. Like historically, we had people who were better kind of in sales or outward facing, and some people who were better inside. And now we're realizing in a world where everything is connected, you can't understand what's happening inside if you don't know what's going on outside, and also vice versa. We're seeing the great leaders are combining local and global. Organizations, when I worked at Intel and GE, these were large multinational organizations. But now even I, as an individual and as a teacher, my home office became a television studio during the pandemic. And I have had days where I have actually literally taught people across 4 continents. And so you're going to find that people have to understand what's happening locally in a region, but be aware globally of what's going on. That's not just something that's going to be people in large organizations. And then the last thing I'll see that we're seeing leaders do really well, they're ambitious. And they want to accomplish great things for themselves and for their companies. But they also have a phrase, Jeff doesn't like when I use this word, but I haven't come up with a better one. It's kind of that notion of statesmanship and stateswomanship. We have some really serious problems in our world. And business leaders are kind of at the forefront of them. And the question is, how do you lead people in your organizations, some of whom are going to agree with you and some of whom are going to disagree with you? And how do you kind of do that at the same time and get your whole team to the other side? And, how do you be ambitious where you're in a world you're rewarded for likes and being bombastic and putting crazy stuff out there? But how do you kind of be also like somebody that looks to you and says, well, that's a serious person that I'm going to want to follow?
And so managing something like this, or if you were to have somebody step back and give themselves a tick list. So pretend like you're back to being blood-sucking VC.
Slimy scum sucking VC, exactly.
Slimy scum sucking VC. So if we're back to that world, and you've got 3 bosses, 3 directors, 3 whatever owners, business owners sat in front of you asking you for money, and you actually were to give them three things that you wanted them to tick off of a list and give an example, what would those three questions be? Because if we go back to the end, I know this is hard and I'm putting you on the spot, but three questions that you would say, BD, I'm not going to invest in you and I'm going to invest in the first one that has all three or at least 2 out of 3. Here it is.
All right. It's a good question. And I want to try to reframe it a little bit. In the context of a job as a venture capitalist, you have one job, which is to make money. Mm-hmm. All the marketing stuff that's out there that says we're changing the world, making a better place, helping entrepreneurs get their dreams, that's all nice, but that's marketing. And really your job, you're a money manager and you're supposed to make money and give a certain returns to your limited partners. Now, there are nice people in venture capital and there are not nice people in venture capital kind of all over the world, but even those nice people and not nice people, they are measured the same way. And so if I'm talking to you, you come to me as an entrepreneur, I want to know, how big can this business get and in what time horizon so it can get the types of returns that my investors want? Do I believe that this team and the team that you've got has the capability of executing to it? And do I think there's defendability? That basically if you do this, you'll have the ability to grow a big, large company that can sustain itself over time. For you as a leader, I'm evaluating the CEOs on 4 attributes. At my venture fund Exceed, we went back and looked at the deals where we made the most money, and we asked, what was it about the CEOs that really stood out of the ones where we were the most successful? And we found 4 attributes. The first is they were energy creators. Like they could get us excited about what they were doing. They could get employees excited to come to work there. They could get customers excited about buying their products. The second thing is, they were problem solvers. Like being an entrepreneur is really flipping hard and statistics are against you. And so it's kind of like there's a brick wall in front of us. Are we going over it, through it, underneath it, or around it? It's Tuesday. We just got to deal with it. Here's the brick wall. The third thing, and my personal favorite, is I call them the truth seekers. These are the people who have a fierce desire to get it right and not to be right. Like I don't need a CEO who has all the answers. I need to have a CEO who wants to go get the right answers. And sometimes they come up with it themselves and sometimes they get help from other people. And so somebody who really wants to kind of, get to that source of ground truth, that's a key thing. And then the last thing is, you want somebody who's a little bit impatient. Right? Because being an entrepreneur, it's really hard. You want somebody, in the vernacular, you want somebody who's a little bit broken and not a lot broken. If any of the listeners are a Star Wars fan, there's a scene in Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, where Han Solo, is flying the Millennium Falcon through an asteroid field. And the robot C-3PO says to him, the probability of successfully navigating an asteroid field is 3,250 to 1. And Harrison Ford, the Han Solo character, looks at him and says, never tell me the odds. And that's kind of what you look for in an entrepreneur. Somebody's like, yeah, I know odds are against me, but let's go. But you want them to be thoughtful in how they're saying, let's go. Now, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but it really kind of comes back to this notion of what am I looking for in an opportunity, and then what am I looking for in the team and the leaders?
So you're not doing that as much anymore, right? You're not VC world.
Well, I still have a toehold here. I'm still making some investments here and there and advising several venture funds. But what's interesting about venture and the link to large organizations is so many large organizations have corporate venture capital arms, and they need to learn that muscle as a way that they can not only be successful in their investments, but take the learnings of what's happening outside of their 4 walls and bring it back into the organization. And that's a real skill for companies to develop as they get larger and become behemoths. How do you, we spend all of our time talking to ourselves in large organizations with PowerPoint slides and internal meetings. How do we know what's going on outside of the building? And a corporate venture capital arm is but one way to do that. And so, how I work with an investing, sometimes it's in the small space where it's, seed, Series A, Series B, Series C. But sometimes I'm, advising large organizations who are actually trying to figure out how they can set up their corporate venture capital arms to be as effective as possible.
And so when you're looking at that, when people are starting to figure out, okay, I'm selling mops, how do I now evaluate going from my bronze to the brain side? How do I start to take it from just we're the best damn mop seller in all of the UK, just keeping it that box centered? How do I then figure out what my forward focus strategy is to start to reach out in a basic way? What tick boxes do I need to put in place?
So I'm going to put that on again on two vectors. Let's start first with like the skills that I think that the companies need to have in Brains and Brawn, because of course I need to like talk about that because I wrote the book. And, I talk about 5 digital attributes in the brain side and how do I think about them. The left hemisphere, right, is basically analytics. How do you make sure that you're using data to improve your products and most importantly serve your customers better? Not just digitizing analog processes for cost efficiencies, but how do you create new capabilities and competencies where you can communicate with your customers better? There's the right hemisphere, right, which is how you deal with creativity. How do you think differently about new business models? How do you think about new technologies and incorporating them? The amygdala, the incorporating empathy. And I talk about some of the companies, that we studied. The Kaiser Permanente is particularly strong at that. Patagonia has been very good at that. Southwest Airlines. That prefrontal cortex. How do you think about taking risk? And we look in the book, I look at companies like Stripe and John Deere and AB InBev and how they think about risk. And then finally on the inner ear, thinking about ownership and balancing that ownership and partnership, and look at companies like 23andMe on the disruptor side, but then even companies like Daimler and how do they think about what do they do and what do they own internally and what do they keep outside their castle walls. So the first thing is I want an organization to be thinking on the digital side, not only about the blocking and tackling of the ones and zeros, but putting the systems in place in order to be effective with it. And then on the other side of it, making sure that you've got the right team. And you're going to have a combination of people internally who will be able to retrain themselves and molt their shells and develop new skills, which we all need to do on an ongoing basis. But also you're going to need to graft in some new competencies and capabilities. You got to hire people who are different and who think different. Katrina Lake, one of my favorite leaders, she founded Stitch Fix, talked about hiring in the context, is somebody a culture fit or a culture add? And a lot of times you want culture fit, but sometimes you need a culture add. Yeah. And so like our large companies, people talk about, will this person fit in here? Well, okay, sometimes the person needs to fit in, but sometimes the organization needs to grow and adapt, and can outside people with new skills and new perspectives help us do that.
It's like when you're making a cake or something like that. Is what's this missing? Oh, this is just missing a bit of fruit juice, a bit of jam or whatever. It's just what's it missing sometimes? You need
exactly.
That catalyst. It's an amazing thing. So when you're doing this, you have people, because people get very sector specific. They get very focused in their vertical. How does without listening to the news, going on BBC, Fox News, whatever your thing is, how does somebody start to well-round themselves besides reading books? Because obviously the Brains and Brawns, they need to read. But outside of that, how do they well-round themselves? What do they listen to? What do they read that's not just directly into airplane news if you're a Southwest Airlines guys? What should they be looking at to widen their scope, to listen outside of their sector, to figure out directions of travel?
So different people do it different ways. I have found I tend to be a voracious consumer of different perspectives. So it's kind of like all of the above of what you described. So podcasts, right? Obviously, there's a lot that's going on. There are great podcasts on topics, on whether you want to go deep on a vertical or you want to think broadly about something. I happen to every day on multiple times per day check different websites on the news, and I try to get different perspectives. So sometimes I'm hitting Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Financial Times. Sometimes it's CNN. Sometimes it's Fox News. I want to understand how different people are talking about different things. I will also, get a lot of newsletters. And you can't always read them all. It's hard to stay on top of everything. But when they come in, there are certain ones that I will read more than others. So that's one thing. Second thing is this notion, I think we need to retrain ourselves, is becoming increasingly important. Given the speed with which technology is changing, I think, for example, every leader needs to have an opinion on sometimes what is referred to as the 4 A's in technology: artificial intelligence, analytics, additive, which is 3D printing, and automation, which can either be robotics in the physical world or it can be RPA in the software world. And understanding how those technologies, which are going to impact every company and every function in every company, what does it mean for yours? And so now it's not that leaders need to be able to sling code. right? It's not like the leaders need to be able to say, shoot, I should have gotten a CS degree as an undergrad and not a political science degree like I had. But you can go on to like things like Coursera and or IIT or IMD in Europe or London Business School or Stanford or MIT. And there are courses that teach you what this stuff is and how it works. So I think it's kind of that curious mindset, which is critical for us to kind of constantly be thinking. By the way, do when something comes out, when something becomes an app that your children are using, do you put it on your phone, right? And try it, and instead of dismissing it and saying it's horrible, even if like we want to like look down on some of these things, we shouldn't. But even if that's our inkling, do we try it and get primary data on it, or do we just dismiss it? Mm-hmm. Back in the day, before TikTok became what it is, I remember asking my students, kind of 2019, how many of you have TikTok on your phone? No one did. I did. And I knew it was addicting before everyone else did, because my wife would come into like the bedroom, and if I was like scrolling on my iPad, she's like, oh, you're on TikTok. I can tell. I remember talking about Snapchat with my students in 2016. And I said, how many of you have Snapchat on your phone? And they were like, oh, no, that's my little brother and my little sister or my younger cousin. Well, by the way, that's how those people were getting the news in those days. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing this with TikTok today. And so the question is, are people going to get that primary data, or is it just something you read about? So some of it needs to be experiential, and some of it is having a wide aperture to take in multiple viewpoints and not judging it when it comes in, processing it, and getting a holistic picture of the system.
That was really good. So speaking around technology and early adopters and early adapters, what bit of technology are you using right now to either make your life easier or a bit more fun?
What's fun mean? I don't know. I'm the most boring man alive, BD. So if you ask my wife and children, they'll say, Dad, you are the most boring man alive. I don't know that I have anything that's truly breakthrough. I'll give two microcosm examples.
Oh, it doesn't have to be breakthrough. I mean, I use Blinkist to download books for 15 minutes, and then I go back and buy it if I like it as soon as I get the gist of it. So it doesn't have to be.
I would say that for me, little things like I just over the holidays got a Pixel 2 watch. And I've had various smart watches over the years, but it's kind of become a much more important part of my life.
Yes.
And from exercise to notifications and knowing how to filter. We get so many notifications that distract us. It's an easy way for me to kind of figure out, okay, what's important and what's not. We recently cut the cord in our house, and I redesigned the home network, and just kind of going through that where, how I, reestablish the mesh network in our house, making sure that it works properly, looking at the number of devices that are connected, kind of like forcing myself to do the boring IT work, that I used to do a long time ago, kind of keeping those muscles fresh was kind of good. I don't know that I have any kind of other technology that I don't think technology is a savior. I think technology is just kind of there, and it's a tool for us to use. I don't have anything kind of, I'm an avid, for the last, 6-7 years, I've been an avid user of Pixel phones. Yep. My Pixel 8 Pro is a good phone. It's funny. So I've mentioned 2 Google products. By the same token, I use an iPad and a Mac. And again, that notion of understanding different ecosystems and different architectures and which work better or worse and why, I just try to kind of experiment with things. It's not that I buy every product and then try them. I don't have time to do that, but I do try to integrate into my life a heterogeneous system that allows me to have primary data on things, which, by the way, I think is acutely true. I talk about it in this question you asked me about how technology impacts my life. I'm seeing so many interesting things happen in other parts of the world as separate from Silicon Valley that I'm very excited and hopeful that even through this world of perpetual crisis, there are so many awesome things happening in other parts of the world that I actually think that there's a real hope for us to do a lot of amazing things in a lot of, the parts of our lives, be it in science and healthcare, living standards of living for people who haven't had that in the past, energy transition, et cetera. Some of them will take a decade or two, but seeing what's happening in other parts of the world has very much informed my worldview when you go and see it with your own eyes, as opposed to just seeing it through a screen.
So I had one more question before I bring you back to, so I'll give you a chance to think while I make a little bit of a joke on your behalf. You won't be able to see this because you're on audio right now. But here your question is, we're going to go to the rewind section here, which is where you give your Oh my gosh, I can't believe I just heard that. I need to rewind the whole episode and listen to it again. So I know to keep things simple, did you only move to Stanford because you're a Liverpool fan? Because the red, I just clocked it as I was sitting there because you couldn't move anywhere else because you're a red. So
I got to tell you, I never used to like the color red because, I grew up, my parents went to UCLA, blue and gold.
Yeah.
I did my undergraduate work at UC Berkeley, blue and gold. Mm-hmm. When I grew up, I rooted for an American football, the Los Angeles Rams, blue and gold. When I did my graduate work at Stanford, it was the first time I liked the color red. The fact that I became a Liverpool fan was really more accidental than anything. And yeah, it is kind of strange that, again, that's part of, as humans, we grow and change. I've learned to appreciate the color red or cardinal, in which, I did not used to like it for the first few decades of my life.
You adapted. You're
exactly,
growing and maturing in your. But that's good. So
I think I'm shrinking, and hopefully I'm maturing as I get older.
Gosh. So here's the rewind section. So your top tip to a business owner that's thinking about modifying their business or going in the right direction. What's a good question or a good statement that you would like to make to them?
Run into the disruption. It's, we don't know what the future is going to be, but we know it's not like the past. And leadership is, you can't avoid it, right? And so what you have to do is you have to run into it and embrace it. And it's uncomfortable and it's hard and it's scary, and be aware of all of those things, but you have no choice. You have to do it anyways. That's the only way to get you and your team to the other side.
That's amazing. And where do we get the book besides Amazon? Where do we find out more about you?
Okay, so you can go to my Stanford faculty webpage. You can go to robertsiegel.com, which is my personal website. There's blog posts on Medium that I've posted about several of my courses over the years. The book is on Amazon and other of your favorite places to order any sort of book. The next book will be out next year on systems leadership. Really still working on the title. I'll have to come back, BD, when it's finished. But the theme that I'm trying to help was helping leaders move from chaos to clarity is the idea of what I'm trying to get to. Is in a world that's so hard, where people feel like they're being pulled in such different, disparate directions, and they feel like no matter what they do, they're going to get it wrong. It's like, this can be done. I can't make the world better and easier because the technological change is still just going to accelerate. But we as humans are way more powerful and resilient than we think in very, very positive ways. And leaders can stand up and provide that guidance for themselves and for their teams. And that's what I hope leaders will get out of the next book.
Robert Siegel, it's been amazing to spend a half an hour or a little bit more with you, even if you are a Liverpool fan, being from around the But thank you so much for coming on the Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast.
Thanks, BD. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Look forward to more in the future.
Thanks for joining us on Grow, Sell, and Retire. For more information, tools, or to book one of our team members to work with your team, business, or to speak at your event or conference, visit rockfind.co.uk. If you like the podcast, you'll love one of BD's 3 books: The Assisted Purchase, True Gravity, and the book the podcast is based on, Grow, Sell, and Retire. If you want to work for the rest of your life, that is your business. If you don't, that is ours.